And we're going to share screen. And oh my goodness, I got to correct something here before we share the screen. Okay, we're working things out here in the studio. 1 second, Michael. I can't do that. Share. I hope you're seeing that.
Okay, plug in.
Yeah. Okay. So just per usual, I don't want to ignore the world. Gosh, so much going on in the Middle East. And then the famine continues in Sudan and nobody's paying attention. Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot going on at the UN this week. Um, Before we get there, I think Carol knows this. There's a new book written by Timothy Snyder, who's sitting here with his back towards us. And his new book is Zelensky's looking at it. And he had an interview with him while he was writing the book. And he obviously admires Zelensky because Zelensky said the president is here as the Russian tanks were rolling towards Kiev. And he said that gave him the inspiration to write this book on freedom. And recently, they had an interview, and he said, "What do you want to talk about?" And then Snyder said, "I want to talk about the philosophy of freedom." And Zelensky was really excited, and they talked the whole afternoon in Ukrainian, which is pretty impressive. And they ended up by talking about the philosophy of theater and his view everything is in Shakespeare. So today, Carol may know, this was his essay, To Be or Not to Be, and Ukraine and the Biden legacy, and how it's up to Biden now. Zelensky, of course, is here for the United Nations, and so he took a side tour to an arms manufacturer in Pennsylvania, a swing state, incidentally. And then Biden just this morning gave this lecture, kind of taking or talk, giving a victory lap, and how Finland and Sweden have joined NATO. And then he got a lot of applause for saying that he loved the job, but he loved his country more, and he's stepping aside. More important, some things are more important than staying in power. So good for him. He took a victory lap.
Can I
Okay.
make an interruption, John?
Yes, please.
I listened to something called the Senate Circle yesterday, where John Tester and Sherrod Brown spoke. And they were asked, what issue is there in your state that the general public may not know about? And Sherrod Brown said, a very large population in Cleveland is Ukrainian or Polish. And they both have been consistently Republican because they thought FDR and then Truman betrayed them at Yalta and then wherever Truman was. But now they've swung because of the Republicans' support for Putin and their opposition to assistance to Ukraine. Both populations have swung solidly toward him, toward the Democrats, which might be enough to help swing Ohio at least to a purple from red.
At least for Sherrod Brown, if not for Kamala. But let's hope.
Yes, Kamala in the debate referenced the 850,000 people of Polish extraction in Pennsylvania, because
That's right.
in the debate she said that Poland will be next if we don't defend Ukraine.
I had not known that the Poles had formerly been, and the Ukrainians in Cleveland, big populations, had formerly been pro-Republican, and now that's cracked. It might make a big difference.
That's great. That's good to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So Sarah waits in Mexico City. You may remember he had been in the Sierra Gorda, and now he was sent back to Mexico City. He's 54 years old, and he wants to get to the frontier and convert souls. It's been his whole life dream ever since the influence of all the priests on Mallorca, and finally King Carlos ascends to the throne in 1759. He has to resign from the crown of Naples, where Aiko and I are going next week. And the Spain has been in, just everybody knows and recognizes that they've been in decline. They're no longer a player. One of his first things that happens to him is he gets sucked into this conspiracy theory about the Jesuits when there's food riots. We talked about that. So he decided to pull the Jesuits out. But the other thing on the other side of the coin is he himself is an Enlightenment person, King Carlos III, and he wants to curb the powers of the Inquisition, and he wants them to use less torture and prefer persuasion. Well, that's something. But for our story, there in 1769, Carlos is very much aware of our Southwest because he's just inherited it formally. It's been part of the 7 Years' War, or what we call the French and Indian War. And now all this territory is recognized as Spanish. And so he's thrown out all the Jesuits, and just pay attention to the right side of this map. We'll get to the left side in just a second. But this is all the pathways. We talked about Texas last week, and the Jesuits being there. And Carlos III sends an emissary to oversee the Jesuit exodus, and there's over 2,000 of them and 220 missions on that map. And just narrowing the story to Baja, which is what all we're really concerned about. Who's going to take over Baja after the Jesuits leave? And so they're thinking about who would be a good guy. This is the special visitor general, inspector general, that Carlos III has appointed, a guy named Galvez. And he's a Carlos agent. But this guy, he's been a judge. He's been an archivist, but he's erratic and mentally unstable. How unstable? Boy, oh boy, real unstable. James Rawls writes this up this is, I think, going to be my main book. There's a few other books, but as we go forward, and this is Rawls on Galvez as just being frankly insane, believing not only that he's getting divine instructions, but that he is God himself. That's pretty radical. But get this, his thought was to use Guatemalan apes as soldiers. You can't make this stuff up. Rawls makes a kind of backdoor comment that eventually this is good for the United States because this California falls to the Spaniards they expand north for the wrong reason, but they're a blocker, they're a holding pattern for California until America can get there, thus preventing Britain or Russia from coming into California. So it's kind of a backdoor argument on why this might have been a good thing for America that Spain moved north. But for Spain, it was, Rawls says, it was impractical and unnecessary. And it was largely the result of mental instability of Galvez. And so history turns in weird ways. This is an example. So the Jesuits are leaving. There's 56 of them that had come to Baja. 16 had died. This is an unforgiving territory. And it takes a while for the Spanish to realize that this is not going to be a place that's going to generate a lot of surplus and a thriving culture. It's mostly hunter-gatherers. And the upper third of Baja is really never controlled, and the lower third that is controls revolts and kills a few of the Jesuits, the Paracu, and so it's a failure. Their goal was to create farms, but they didn't understand the landscape. But they'd been pretty brutal, separating Indian populations by gender, forcibly converting, whippings. It wasn't a happy story at all. The Jesuits were more successful in other places. But no, way up north where the Kumeyaay are, they live right in San Diego, where the Sacred Mission is right now. And this was the first mission. And the natives that went to live there died. And the population of Baja fell by 2/3, and it was disease. And what did the Spanish think was causing the Native Americans to die? Obviously, they didn't know about the specifics of the disease, but they must have thought that it was the work of some evil forces, perhaps the devil. But things weren't going well, and the population, conquered populations, often don't reproduce, and that was certainly the case. So a disaster. So now we look at this side of the map, and this is the main points I want to point out is in the south, Laredo, La Paz, and then at the furthest north the Spanish ever got was a place called Velicate.
Oh, thank you.
Not only do they have to get up to the Baja, they have to go this territory that's territory incognito. Nobody's ever traveled by land up this far. They have by sea, but not by land. And so who's going to be in charge? Well, it's going to be divided into two parts: the religious and the secular. And Serra's, he's been waiting 20 years in Mexico, and finally he gets the call. And as we've seen earlier, he is coming north, and he's got to come 500 miles. Some of it'll be by boat. He's got a bum leg. Uh, and the first thing that he's in charge of is ejecting the Jesuits. There's no talk about going further north than Baja. But Spain, now returning to the geopolitics, are worried about the Russians coming. And they decide that, okay, it's time. The only way we can prevent the Russians from coming is to settle the California, and to settle it and create a friendly population, we first got to save their souls. This is what they believe, and they've got distorted maps of what's going on, and they think Alaska is much closer. They've heard about Alaska, but it's not on this map, certainly. And we've talked about Bob found problems with maps all along, but this one doesn't have anything up there. And the Russians, meanwhile, have marched across, going east. They went faster to the east than Americans did move to the west. They got from Moscow to the Pacific in 60 years, and it was mostly with the incentive of furs. The furs further up north were amazing, very thick and very valuable. But who's in charge in Moscow? It's Catherine the Great, who's German, and she marries Peter the Third in 1745. They'd been fixed up by Frederick the Great, and it's not a happy marriage. Peter finally ascends to the throne in 1762, which puts their marriage into a turmoil, because Catherine, and she has been manipulated by power brokers in the corrupt Russian aristocracy. And after 17 years, she joins in with an assassination plot of her own husband and takes the throne. And such as royal politics in Russia. One of her lovers was Potemkin. We've talked about him in the past. And one of the first orders of business is to partition Poland, which is constantly being partitioned over the last 300 years. She was partially motivated by the head of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, was an ex-lover. She has a lot of ex-lovers, it turns out. And in the East, where we're focused on now, she's pushing Russian settlers to colonize Alaska. And that's what's happening. And that's what gets Carlos III's attention and sends Serra north, the larger geopolitical environment. So they dream up this sacred expedition. They have to go 720 miles north from Laredo. 500 miles they're somewhat familiar with, but after that it's terra incognito. They don't know what it is. But they decide that they're going to finally settle San Diego and Monterey. That was discovered or named by Viscano 167 years before. And this 167 years coincides with Spain's downfall as a major player in Europe. But Carlos III wants to resuscitate, make Spain great again. And so this little graphic novel sort of summarizes it perfectly. This is Galvez telling Serra that he wants him to extend El Camino Real north another 1,000 miles, all the way to Monterey. They don't think there's anything north of Monterey, right? Because they just never figured out the entrance to Golden Gate. And he's not going to do it alone. He's going to go in tandem with the secular security, the soldiers. Captain Portola is in charge of them, and they'll go and secure the coast all the way up to Monterey. So this is an inaccurate map that just shows the Camino Real, that we all get on Camino Real at one time or another in our daily lives. But this was where it was born, at least as it extends in Upper California. So, so actually, was Russia and Britain ever going to get to Monterey? No, not, at least not in the near future, not in 1760s. But the Russians would reach our wonderful San Francisco in 1806. And this is Conchita Arguello. So we've those of us that have gone to medical school walk past Arguello Street all the time. But this is Conchita, the daughter of the general in charge of the Presidio in 1806. And this is a guy, Rozanov, who has come down from Sitka, Alaska. He's one of the Russians that got over there, sent by Catherine. But by the time he gets there, she's gone. There are another Tsars on the throne. But he's in Sitka, and Sitka's starving. So out of desperation, he takes a ship down to San Francisco and goes to the Presidio and meets the generalissimo there, but also his daughter, Conchita. So all this is laid out in a wonderful book by Gertrude Atherton. Russia really doesn't get down to this area for another 6 years at Fort Ross. The Brits don't really get settled in anywhere near California, but they do settle up in Vancouver when this Admiral Vancouver goes on his expedition. So there was no imminent threat, but these were the actual early dabblings of Russia and Britain. Here's the thing. Conchita and Rozanov fall in love. And when we get to 1806 and the history of San Francisco, we'll talk about their love affair in more detail. But here's the thing, the Russians, this story, Americans don't even know it exists, but Russians love a tragic love story. And this has been incorporated into their folklore. And the most recent iteration of it was a Soviet, I'm saying 1970s, a Soviet rock opera called Juno and Avos, which were the name of the ships of Rozanov. And you won't believe it, but this rock opera was scheduled to play in San Francisco in April of 2020, and it was cut off by COVID. It was canceled. And so what if this little virus hadn't mutated and there hadn't been a pandemic, and this rock opera played, and it opened up an era of good feeling between Russia and America, and I'm being silly and silly optimistic. But there you are, history, and the way that history lives on in rock operas. Um, so Serra was picked because of what he had done in Sierra Gordo. And I just want to, because for us to understand what he did in California, we have to understand what he did before, in the 20 years that he had to wait. And he was a real fanatic about overcoming all the difficulties in trying to convert souls. And what did that entail? So this phrase, gente de razón, the people of reason, there was a belief among the Franciscans that the Indians could be turned into hunter-gatherers, into people of reason, by teaching them Western civilization. And where does this come from? Historically, it's a great debate in 1550. So this debate happens 200 years before, but it's an important debate that lives on. And Sepulveda was the realist in this debate, and said Spain has the power, and Spain should use its power for its own benefit. Where De las Casas says, no, wait a minute, he's the humanist. We've got to treat these human beings ethically, and his influence. There was never an American that was quite as strong as De las Casas in talking about how we should treat the Native American population. His tradition lives on, certainly, in the Franciscans. And they often are arguing with the Spanish soldiers who are more in the Sepulveda camp. So I asked Chat GPT about this debate, and they said that De las Casas questioning of the moral justification was enough in shaping Spanish colonial law, slightly improving the legal protections for the indigenous populations as compared to, say, the American experience. So what does Serra do? He's very imaginative. He acts out the crucifixion for the Indians, dramatize it. He tries to turn the Native Americans into cultivators of the land as opposed to hunter-gatherers. He introduces livestock, and that certainly changes the landscape and even the country we live in. It changes the flora, for instance, of the open space we live next to. So what's the moral question? Should the Miwok have converted to farming completely? And it's an unanswerable question. Um, uh, Again, I point out the Jesuit belief in the humanity of Native Americans in this wonderful movie. But here's a big problem. And when you're reading about what happened in California, this just keeps coming up over and over again. For Franciscans lodging complaints against the soldiers and their abuse of the native women. And here, this graphic novel has Serra saying, we've got to get families with women here. The people are beginning to wonder what kind of a culture we have. And again, this happens over and over again and throughout the years of the missions. So the head of the security force is Portola, a name that's familiar to us. He's Catalan, which is interesting because Mallorca, out there in the middle of the Mediterranean, their language is Catalan. And so he works with Serra, and as they head north to San Diego and then Monterey. His first business, though, is to get rid of the Jesuits, which he helps Serra do. And then what they're trying to do is replicate what Vizcano did 167 years before. The black line is Vizcano coming up to San Diego, up. He goes into Monterey Bay, describes it glowingly as the most wonderful bay ever, and comes back. His over-generous interpretation of Monterey as a bay is a problem. And in fact, when the true nature of the bay is found out, I think they hung the map maker. That's how badly that was taken. So in San Diego, it's always said San Diego de Alcala. And so I'm interested in what does Alcala mean? San Diego de Alcala. And it starts off with the real guy, Didicus of Alcala, but he later, after he is sanctified, is Santiago de Alcala. And Didicus became a saint because of his passion and belief. And here he is in ecstasy before the cross in this painting. And he got his first experience on the Canary Islands in the 1400s. So he's converting souls before the New World is discovered. And he always defended the indigenous people, which is why he was sanctified. But that caused him to have to leave the Canary Islands. He went to Rome and during an epidemic became an infirmarian, which I guess is like a male nurse, and was involved in what was described as miraculous cures. And he was sent to the friary in Alcala, which is a suburb near Madrid. He died there and was canonized, the usual things. But he was a healer, and that's how he became San Diego. So that's the San Diego of Alcala. That explains his whole title. So the sacred expedition is heading north to San Diego and then up to Monterey. But there's one big problem. There's two ships that are going to support the land people. So it would be too much to take all the supplies on donkeys. Although they do take quite a bit, but there's two ships that are going to keep them supplied throughout their settlement there. And both ships get caught in these currents. One goes close to the coast, one goes out to sea and catches this current, gets swept way out, and has to fight its way back. And it gets into San Diego much after the shore hugger. And so they're off to a bad start, and being away at sea so much longer than they were planning because of storms and these currents, they all got scurvy, running out of wholesome food. And then one of the ships has typhus. And only by the time the ships arrive, of 120 sailors, only 16 are fit. So they first order of business is to build a hospital using the sail as the roof of the hospital. And then the dead just keep piling up. There's a point in San Diego called Dead Man's Point. There's a building on it. They finally get water, which fresh water, but it takes a few days, and it's not very close, the source of flowing water. And this is Dead Man's Point today. So now the two land companies who've been going up by land up to Baja, they are divided into one. The first one to leave has all the livestock, and Juan Crespi. You remember him from last week. He was also from Mallorca and a student of Serra's. And he is the diarist. So a lot of what we know about what went on was written by Crespi. And Crespi was also later, fast forwarding a decade, was also on exploratory trips through our area, through the East Bay, and wrote up what he saw. In the second group was Portola and Serra, who got a late start and finally catches up with Portola in the second group. The first group arrives in San Diego a couple of weeks before the second group. So, and as they're coming in to San Diego by land, they're attacked by the Kumeyaay. And they're well protected with leather vests so the arrows shot from a distance don't bother them. And then Crespi writes how they were harassed and constantly taunted as they continued to move north. Um, so the first overland party arrives with all the men and the horses and pack mules and the cattle. And cattle as I said earlier, are just going to change California, and it's going to make it hard for the Indians to continue to be gathering and hunter gathering in the way that they were used to. And so the pests that they bring destroy. There, as I said, the second party with Serra in it is slower, going across this unknown territory north of Velicatat. And when they get there, though, they see, oh, there's two ships in the harbor, and so they're very optimistic. What they don't know is that half of the 300 men that began on the sacred expedition in two ships and two overland parties, that 50% of them will die before they get to San Diego. And once they get there, there's another 38 that'll soon be dead. 30 are hospitalized on the makeshift hospital on the beach. The ship doctor was also sick and later goes insane. And half of the 150, so 75, were hospitalized for months. Um, they had Indian porters, but 2/3 of them had deserted, and some of them had died. And of the two ships, there were only 8 sailors that were fit survivors. Portola, his first decisions looking at this disaster was to get the sailors on one of the ships to go back to get more supplies. They're going to need more supplies than they thought because of they didn't get past San Diego, and they're already out of supplies. And so there's only 2 sailors left to guard the remaining ship. I talked about the doctor going crazy. This is a mural, and I think it's in the Parnassus complex somewhere. But this is the Dr. Pratt, the doctor that's confronted with all these sick sailors from typhus and scurvy on the beach, and he goes crazy. The typhus was the other problem. Just taking the descriptions of how the men were suffering. It was probably this tsutsugamushi described by the Japanese, and it just takes a few flea-infested rats on a ship, and pretty soon everybody's going to have it. And that's what happened, and that's what a lot of the men died of on the beach. So there's the culprit right there. And this is the life cycle. There can be intermediate hosts, but it can go directly. And I think I mentioned in the past that one of our sons actually got tsutsugamushi in Indonesia on the beach. And so Portola, there's one ship left, and he wants to get on that ship and go to Monterey. The sooner he gets to Monterey, the better. But the admiral on that ship refuses because there's only 2 real good sailors left. And so Monterey is forced to consider just going by land. from San Diego to Monterey, which he, without hesitation, does. These guys are adventurers, and they roll the dice. And it's a fraught expedition at this time of year because 250 years ago they're still in the little ice age, and the snow has come down further at this time of year, and there's some risk that the mules will slip on ice going when they have to go over passes, and so. Um, Portola nevertheless takes everybody that's there. The ships have gone and taken a lot of able-bodied men. Portola gets this group of people together, and 70 people in all. And again, Father Crespi is in this group. Writing in his diary is the source of the information. So who's left on the beach? Serra. He's left there to build a mission and to take care of 50 invalids in the hospital tent. And he's only got 2 priests and eight kochimi cooks. So the porters are the Native Americans from Baja. This is the one tribe that took to the Jesuit conversion and acculturated, assimilated to the Spanish way of life, and they served as cooks. So Serra commands 2 priests, 8 kochime, and has 8 soldiers to help guard what? The ship, the hospital, the church that he's building, the supplies, and the sleeping area. So they're spread pretty thin. The Spanish are ill adapted. They don't like to swim in the ocean, and this was true of the Portuguese in Brazil too. So their hygiene leaves a lot to be desired. For those of us that watched the original Shogun or the recent version of Shogun, which contrasts the British ship life hygiene with the Japanese daily bath, will recognize this. Anyway, the Native Americans see how sick the Spanish are, and they're not at all interested in converting to Christianity. In fact, they make fun of the soldiers. They stick around because they like to trade for stuff, not food. They don't take to the Spanish cuisine, but they certainly like fabric and metal, which they have none of, glass, which they have none of, and ditto ceramics. So they get a little pushy, and they start raiding, and they even make efforts to steal the roof of the hospital that's made out of the sail. That's it's been fashioned into a tent, and finally they're going to revolt. The people are still dying on the beach. Serra ventures out and tries to convert and baptize a baby. But as soon as he starts reciting the catechism, it scares the natives who are spooked by the hocus pocus. And they take their babies and they run. And then comes the uprising. They finally have had it with these Spaniards on their beach. They see that one ship is left. They've seen that the majority of the soldiers and personnel have left on the land march to Monterey, and they attack. The soldiers that have remained get their guns, and these are 16th century. I'm sorry, 1600s guns, old guns, but enough to scare the Native Americans. Two of them die, but one of the Cochima porters, who has been particularly close to Serra, is killed with an arrow to the neck. And Sarah's response to this is to turn the other cheek. There'll be another, spoiler alert, there'll be another revolt in 1775 that'll be much worse, and the Spanish will not turn the cheek. So Portola, meanwhile, he's gone through Los Angeles, the Los Angeles River. He's named it a very long name that we talked about before. He comes up through Santa Barbara. The Chumash there are the most civilized and have the highest level of material wealth. And they love entertaining the Spanish a little bit too much. And so Portola is dazzled by their canoes. He sees their cemetery, so they handle the dead in a civilized way, and they entertain the Spanish with their music and incantations, so much so that it kept the Spanish up at night. And they finally had to threaten to leave if the Chumash didn't stop chanting and playing their loud musical instrument. By the way, they notice that there are some men that are clearly non-binary, that hang out with the women and dress like women. But Portola eventually picks up the Salinas River, and he follows it to its outlet in Monterey Bay. But he is fooled. He doesn't realize that he's found Monterey Bay because he's read Vizcaino's description of Point Pinos. This is where Asilomar is. And south of Point Pinos is another river, the Carmel River. And Vizcaino was there in April when the Carmel River was running, which put Point Pinos to the north. But when Portola gets there in October, the Carmel River is dry. And he thinks the Salinas River must be the river Vizcaino. And so here, this Point Pinos is to the south. So he's not convinced that this is Monterey Bay. And this is a better map of the Salinas River watershed. And here you can see the Carmel River is less, wouldn't be noticeable in October. So he unnecessarily heads north looking for what they'd already found, and found what they were not looking for, which is the San Francisco Bay. And they sent a party out to try to get around the bay so that they could get on up to their real destination, which is Drake's Bay. But they find that this darn bay extends further south than they anticipated, and they give up and they turn around and they come back. Crespi notes that it would be a fine harbor, but this ragtag group by this time is running out of food. And they don't even consider that this might be the Northwest Passage, which we talked about before. So Portola returns all the way back to San Diego and tells Serra we couldn't find it. And he says that's like going to the Vatican and not finding the Pope. But you'll remember Portola sent off a ship to get resupplies, and that the ship has not returned yet. So Portola now is desperate, and he thinks that they're all going to have to go back to Velicatat, which is the furthest north supply place overland. He sets a date. He says, but listen, we'll wait until March 19th. And according to the folklore, it's hard to believe that this is exactly true, but sometimes history is rewritten for drama. And the date comes closer. Serra realizes that all will be lost if that resupply ship doesn't come back. So he resorts to public prayer on the beach. And then, of course, in full historical drama, perhaps with some license, he spots the San Antonio and on the horizon. And so after 1.5 years of disaster after disaster, finally the resupply ship comes. And here you can see the resupply ship on the horizon. And so they celebrate Easter Sunday there in San Diego and put up a cross. This is Junipero Serra, the Mission San Diego de Alcala. And then there's been reenactments of the drama at San Diego. Some artists recaptured these reenactments of San Diego. This is a reenactment of the tension between the priests and the soldiers. So now Portola is going to go north again now that they've got resupplied. And he's going to go north at the same time that one of the ships goes north, like Vizcano, and they're going to communicate. And he figures that they'll be able to spot where Vizcano was 167 years before from the ship at sea. Better than he can on the land, and they'll communicate. And so they get back in April, and now the Carmel River is flowing, and it's quite easy to identify Vizcano's landmarks in relation to Point Pinos from the sea. And here they are, as promised, in Monterey, under a big live oak tree, the same live oak tree that Vizcano described being there 167 years before. It's Pentecostal Sunday, and Serra is able to conduct an appropriate mass. Pentecostal, I'm always curious. Pentecostal, what does that mean? Five, as in Pentagon. And it has to do with the 50th day after Easter, Pentecostal. And that's when in religious tradition, the Holy Spirit comes back to the remaining 11 disciples. Judas has hanged himself after the resurrection. And so this tree still exists in much reduced fashion, but it looks like it's got a few branches. And this is where Viscano celebrated in 1602 and where Serra celebrated in 1770. And the bells are rung. This is one of Sarah's favorite things to impress the Indians, Native Americans. And then he does a little dance to get rid of any little devils that may be around. And that's, I think, where I'm going to stop. When I resume in a month, we'll talk about where he goes. He now has two missions. The second mission is, I'll just tell you this, I won't go over this, but San Carlos de Borromeo. I'll start off in a month to explain where this comes from. And we'll just say that they had the mass at the same live oak, and it was singing bells. He blessed the salt and the water, and they put up a giant cross, just like they had in San Diego. So that's where we'll stop. And we got Serra to Monterey.
Ah,
Well done. That was a
Very good.
big trek.
Very good.
All right.
so you said that the Spanish were largely credited, especially what's his name, Galvez,
Yeah.
of just occupying Alta California to keep the Russians from coming south. But maybe that's about California. Fort Ross is in Sonoma County. There's a lot of Pacific Coast. It was also, I guess, could have been seized by the Russians interested in their fur trade. Were they kept out by the British,
They weren't kept out. As you say, they came all the way down, and I think they stayed at least 20 years. Nobody threw them out. I think the final mission that was built under Mexican authority, not the Spanish had gone. So I think it was after the Mexicans took over in the 1820s. The final mission in Sonoma was built to keep to mark the land and keep the Russians from coming any further south. But
they
that
didn't. The Russians didn't. I mean, what happened to Oregon and Washington and Vancouver?
well, the up there it was free territory. If you haven't seen the movie First Cow, that'll give you a really good sense of what Oregon was like in this unsettled time period. And the main activity up there is gonna be fur trapping
Yeah.
and Astoria and Fort Astoria, named after John Jacob Astor. And that's gonna, and we talked about the fur rush in the Delta earlier. So that's what's driving a lot of it, but it's mostly free enterprise. It's not um, uh, big big powers trying to grab Britain or Russia did not have enough of a presence to mount any kind of military effort. Yeah, Jim.
I know a little about Oregon history.
Yes, you do.
Everyone knows about Lewis and Clark, and you're right. John Jacob Astor founded Astoria in 1811, and he was a magnate from New York, but also the Hudson's Bay Company, which was British, came into Vancouver, and there was, as you say, free enterprise between, both the British and American trappers, Jedediah Smith and other explorers, until they finally had a democratic determination and they voted by one vote to join the Americans rather than the British
Oh, really?
back in the 1840s.
Is
Uh,
that right? I didn't know that.
there's, there's quite a bit of history there. But
Have,
anyway,
have you seen First Cow, Jim?
no, I haven't. But I've been to Champoeg where that vote was taken. It was uh, it was thought that the British would win the vote, but there were a couple of guys who came in kind of at the end of the tally and voted for the U.S., to join the Americans. And so I think that was 18, I want to say 43 or something like that.
Wow.
Well, Bob is just devastated how close it came.
Out- In thinking back actually to talk about Fort Ross, basically that I think the Russians were actually trying to get to Hawaii. They weren't really interested in coming further south. They were actually trying to find a way to get to Hawaii, I believe.
Well, when I tell the story of the love story of Count Rozanov, he's got to be a count, right? And Conchita Arguello, you'll see that there was some desire of the Russians in Alaska to have be connected to a bread basket. Now, maybe that's why they wanted to go to Hawaii. I don't know, but they saw by 1806 that there was cattle, at least a cattle economy, and I think they were at some point hoping that there would be some kind of source of food for them. Okay, well,
Cool.
there you are. Sarah can wait for a month, and then we will get him to the third mission that he will be founding. It's dedicated to Saint Anthony of Padua, and Eichel and I were lucky enough to be in Padua. Ramsey took us there for the art, which we'll no doubt talk about when we talk about the third mission, which is I think 80 miles east of Carmel. That's the mission to San Antonio de Padua.
So you're off to Sicily, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Have a
Sean, I
great
may give you a call just to share a couple of experiences that Annie and I had in Sicily not too long ago. And see what's on your agenda when you get there.
Okay. We'll report.
Bon voyage, guys.
You want to stop the recording?
Okay. Bye-bye.
Great place for history.